The flight engineer must be in a position to supervise refueling on both sides of the aircraft because there are fuel tanks on opposite sides of the helicopter. He must maintain communications with the pilot at all times. The CH-54's special problem is the location of its exhaust near the refueling port and the excessive heat it puts out. In this case, we shut the #1 engine down to avoid the excessive exhaust temperature on the refueling personnel and the open fuel port. This applies to both manual and pressure refueling. Prior to arrival of the aircraft, the sling loading hookup area should be cleared of all loose objects that might be thrown about by rotor wash. Only personnel involved in the operation should remain in the area. On arrival, the pilot in command will determine that the ground personnel are positioned and ready for the hookup. The signalman must maintain a position 30 to 50 meters in front of the load facing the aircraft, where he is in constant view of the pilot. When hovering toward and over the load for the hookup, the pilot follows the signalman's directions. While the helicopter is over the load, the aircraft crew and hookup crew must be constantly alert for possible engine failure. It cannot be overemphasized that due to the nature of the turbine engine, a power loss or engine failure may occur with no warning to either ground or air crew. Constant alertness is imperative. Engine failure. The pilot releases the load. The signalman turns away from the aircraft and dives to the ground. The hookup man dives and rolls as far to the right as possible. They cover their heads with their arms to protect themselves should the helicopter crash. The pilot executes an auto rotation to the left of the load. After a normal hookup, the hookup man will move to the right and forward. The signalman will direct the pilot as he lifts the load, checks for other aircraft in the area, and clears the pilot for takeoff. The same general safety rules apply with the CH-47, except that no signalman is used. His duties are performed by the pilot and the flight engineer, who can effectively observe operations through the floor hatch of the aircraft. During hookup, static electricity on the cargo hook cannot be effectively dissipated from within the aircraft. Electric shock can be avoided by grasping the rigging donut with gloved hands. With the CH-54, safety rules are similar. No signalman is used, as his duties are performed by the pilot and flight engineer. They can effectively observe operations from their positions in the aircraft. Static electricity is not normally a problem. The loading scenes just shown do not cover all types of sling operations. Other loads, such as ammunition, heavy weapons, and vehicles, involve safety procedures peculiar to these types of loads. Standard procedures for handling various loads and aircraft should be reviewed frequently and followed by all personnel concerned. This will promote greater safety during this hazardous operation. When moving and parking aircraft on an airfield, all movements will be coordinated and controlled through the aircraft traffic controllers located in the airfield tower. Only designated hovering lanes and parking spots should be used. Hovering lanes and parking spots are indicated by painted stripes, airfield lights for night work, or other indicators. Their usage varies with the airfields, and a complete explanation of each airfield can be found in the operations office. Aircraft crews will familiarize themselves with the correct procedures of the airfields they will be utilizing. When moving and parking on an airfield, the aircraft crews should use caution to avoid maintenance vehicles, maintenance personnel, other aircraft, and miscellaneous personnel and equipment which might be located on or near the hovering lanes and parking areas. Personnel on the ground should avoid positioning themselves or any equipment in any location that would obstruct aircraft movement. Any loose equipment should be secured whenever rotor blades are turning in the area. Aircraft crews observing any safety hazards on an airfield should avoid them and make a report immediately to the ground controller. Landings at other than established airfields, such as rough or unprepared terrain, will involve ground movement and parking procedures which are different from the normal ones. The pilot in command is responsible for safely moving and parking his aircraft. If no ground handling personnel are available at rugged sites, movement is accomplished by full utilization of his crew to avoid any obstacles or personnel in his path on all sides. Because the CH-47 is so large and has limited visibility, ground handling personnel are required to safely move the aircraft when operating in a restricted area. Ground handling personnel should be utilized in conjunction with the crew on board to safely move the aircraft. If ground handling personnel are not available, a crew member must be dismounted and used instead. To avoid confusion between ground personnel and the aircraft crew, ground personnel must be thoroughly familiar with and use only the standard hand and arm signals and equipment described in Field Manual 21-60. They must be familiar with the requirements and procedures for both day and night operations for each type of aircraft. Ground guidance personnel must be fully dressed in proper work uniforms, goggles and ear protection, gloves, and a fully serviceable uniform. The position of the signalman when directing utility aircraft is in front of it, where he can best be seen by the pilot. A special caution when directing armed helicopters, such as the AH-1G Cobra. The signalman must not position himself directly in front of the aircraft at any time. Stay to either side of the front. With the CH-47, caution should be used not only to avoid direct contacts between the rotor blades and other objects, but to prevent damage resulting from rotor wash and flying debris. Maintain as much distance as possible between the aircraft and any possible item which may be damaged. All aircraft crews must be dressed in complete flight uniforms to include flight helmet, Nomex gloves, the Nomex flight suit, and leather boots. At all times, helicopter engines are being started or are running. Helmet face shields must be down during refueling operations. SPH-4 helmets should be worn by crew members for ear protection. Ground personnel must wear protective earmuffs. Uniforms must be fully serviceable, that is, no holes, no rips or tears. During cold weather operations, additional clothing may be desirable, but movement or vision must not be restricted. Maintenance personnel must be fully dressed in proper work uniforms. They should wear Nomex suits if available. When near a helicopter, remember to remain well clear of the tail and main rotor blades. On some helicopters, the main rotor blades are low and extra caution is necessary, especially during high wind situations. Caution around turning rotor blades cannot be overemphasized. Aircraft require proper grounding during refueling operations. Avoid fuel overflow, feedback, or sloshing out. Fire is a great hazard. Hookup teams, properly positioned and well briefed on procedures, minimize dangers. Ground handling and aircraft crews must be thoroughly familiar with and use only standard hand and arm signals. Aircraft crews must be properly dressed during all aircraft operations. Properly dressed ground crews minimize exposure to flying debris. Every aircraft has its own inherent dangerous characteristics. Your life depends on learning and following standard safety procedures. The time to start is now.
Helicopters, the most versatile equipment to appear on the scene in recent years, are making possible new concepts in transportation for both military and civilian use. The helicopter has earned a place of importance in aviation because in small confined areas, it can take off or land vertically. It can move forward. It can move sideways in either direction. It can move backwards. And if the engine should fail in midair, it can make a safe emergency landing. Although the helicopter has only recently become a practical means of transportation, its idea has occupied man's thought for centuries. Leonardo da Vinci expressed his idea for a flying machine in the 15th century. Others followed da Vinci in dreaming of vertical flight for man. In 1783, a French scholar, Lannoy, and a French mechanic named Bienvenu demonstrated to the French Academy of Science a flying top made of feathers, sticks, and string, like this model you see here, It was the first heavier-than-air device ever to fly on its own power. Half a century later, an English schoolboy, George Cayley, heard about Lannoy's flying top. In 1843, he designed a 4-rotor model helicopter, but having only heavy steam engines available for power, he never tried to build a full-size machine. In 1878, Enrico Forlanini of Italy built a model powered by a midget steam engine, which actually hovered at 40 feet for 20 seconds. The advent of the gasoline engine marked a turning point in the development of the helicopter. Inspired by the success of a pilotless machine built by Charles Renault, his student Louis Breguet built this helicopter in 1907. It carried him to an altitude of 5 feet. This flying octopus was built by Dr. Georges de Baudisart for the United States Army Air Service and test flown in 1922. It rose to a height of 5 feet and stayed aloft for 1 minute and 43 seconds, but was too complicated and proved impossible to control in flight. In that same period, the American Emil Berliner and his son Henry built 2 machines. This, his second, proved fairly successful. Experiments continued throughout the world, and in 1923 came a significant development. A Spanish inventor, Juan de la Cierva, developed the autogyro. It was a cross between a helicopter and an airplane. It had fixed wings and a standard propeller to raise it off the ground. A free-spinning rotor on top gave additional lift. He was able to cross the English Channel in this machine, and his principles of design were to lead to a successful, true helicopter. In 1934, the Frenchman Louis Breguet tried again. This time he achieved real stability and control. In fact, his machine is generally considered the first practical helicopter. In 1937, the German Heinrich Focke built this FW-61. It could hover, go straight up or down, and move forward or backward. It set new records for endurance, speed, distance, and altitude. Other inventors, of course, were hard at work developing different ideas in helicopter configuration. Here in America, Igor Sikorsky, who had been carrying on rotary wing experiments for years, made his first free flight with this VS-300 in 1940. Although the Army had already commissioned the Pot-Lepage Company to build a helicopter, it followed Sikorsky's progress with keen interest. As a result of Sikorsky's success with the VS-300, that model was used as a prototype for the first helicopter designed for military use, the Sikorsky XH-4. From this basic design came Sikorsky's later models, the H-19. Then later, the much larger and greatly improved H-34. Other designs by American inventors were being developed. In the late 1940s, 2 more models were accepted by the United States Army. One produced by Bell was the forerunner of this, H-13. The other was the H-23, manufactured by Hiller. Piasecki designed the H-25, a small, compact utility helicopter employing the principle of 2 rotors driven by a single engine. He also devised another tandem rotor machine, the H-21, known as the workhorse. Cayman built machines such as the HOK series, using 2 rotors mounted side by side and so synchronized that the revolving blades intermeshed. Even though these present helicopters are satisfactory, research continues to explore new fields. The search for a practical small helicopter has resulted in this experimental 2-place model powered by ram jets on the blade tips. In the one-man class is this simple, compact version of the conventional helicopter. Developed by Hiller, it has the advantage of being collapsible and easily carried. A distinct departure is the flying platform, with its rotor blades mounted on a frame under the pilot. Directional control is accomplished by the pilot's body movements. Seeking engines with higher horsepower and more efficient operation, designers have turned to turbine engines. One, designed by Lycoming, is used in this Cayman HOK. Bell's latest utility helicopter, designed for the Army, the XH-40, also uses the Lycoming turbine engine. In reaching out for greater and greater capacity, Sikorsky uses two engines to drive one main rotor in the H-37. Although we have accomplished a great deal in the development of the helicopter, we have even more to accomplish in the future, and the task is not without its difficulties. Rotary wing was man's first idea of flight, but practical helicopters were not produced until long after fixed-wing craft filled the air. This was because helicopter pioneers had to solve so many additional problems. Consider some of the problems and the solutions which made rotary wing flight possible. Take a bird's-eye view of the two types, fixed-wing and rotary wing aircraft. There is a resemblance. Rotor blades are really wings. That's why helicopters are called rotary wing aircraft. So first let's see how a fixed-wing aircraft flies. Then go on to the helicopter. In flight, two basic forces must be overcome: weight and drag. The forces which overcome these two factors are lift and thrust in fixed-wing aircraft. Lift is obtained from the velocity of airflow over the airfoil or wing and is about equal to the square of the velocity. Thrust is obtained from the propeller, which drives the aircraft through the air. So the greater the thrust, the greater the velocity of the airflow, and the greater the lift. Another factor which affects lift is a change in the angle of attack of the wing, as shown here. The angle of attack is the angle formed between the chord line of the airfoil and the relative wind. Increasing the angle of attack up to the stalling point will increase lift within the limits of airfoil design. Now, any increase in the flow of air or in the angle of attack, or both, will increase lift. A conventional fixed-wing aircraft